Morning leaked into the city like pale wine seeping through old wood. From the high windows of the Tower of the Hand, Eddard Stark watched the haze lift off the eastern roofs, the first smoke of cook fires threading the air with scents of cheap lamp oil and onions and river rot. The bells of Baelor told the hour, slow as a heartbeat. He had slept little, and the parchment before him bore the weight of more dragons' heads than any honest man should ever count. Ledgers do not lie, he told himself, and yet they often refused to speak plainly. Columns in a neat, foreign hand. Sums that added but made no sense. Casks of coin emptied and filled in rhythms that did not match the king's wars or his hunts or his moods. And everywhere the faintest sign of a single mind, clever enough to never write its name. Lord Hand. He looked up. Jory Castle stood at the threshold, a shadow against the waking light, eyes clear beneath the mop of dark hair, as steady as the day Eddard had chosen him. "You sent for me," Jory said, stepping in with the quiet confidence that always managed to leaven Eddard's worries. "The gatehouse scribe," Eddard said, tapping the ledger. "What was his name?" "Ruggan," Jory replied at once. Soft-spoken, too watchful. Pause. "One of the king's jailers." Eddard turned the page, tracing lines of ink with a finger. "He was paid 3 times in the last fortnight from the Master of Coin's discretionary reserve. Part of the city watch stipend, they will say. Yet Janos Slint's signature is nowhere. The seal here," he tapped a wax impression so faint it was almost a smear, "is neither the crown's nor the watch. Then whose?" Jory's mouth hardened. "I have my suspicions," Eddard said. He thought of rings that flashed in smoky rooms and easy smiles that never reached the eyes. "And I would see them proved. Have will follow Ruggan from his post this afternoon. No cloaks. He goes afoot with a stick like any old dockman, and you give him no more men than he can lose to a bad alley and still walk away alive." Jory nodded and turned to go, then paused as if on an unfinished thought. There was one other thing, a gold cloak, young. He slipped a purse at the hook last night to a riverman who never made it to the water. 2 of our lads were there for their own supper. They saw the purse when it fell in the scuffle. "You have it." Jory reached into his cloak and set a pouch upon the table, supple and stout, the stitching too fine for the docks. When Eddard drew the ties wide, dragon heads winked up at him, fat and new-minted, and among them a thin wafer of wax stamped with a bird in flight. Not a falcon of the Vale, not a crowned raven, but a lean-breasted songbird rendered with patient care. The lines around Eddard's mouth deepened. "Who carries a mockingbird on his seal in this city?" Jory asked quietly, as if they both needed to hear the answer spoken to make it true. "Peter Baelish," Eddard said. The name was a dagger that never cut the same way twice. "Master of Coin, called Littlefinger." Jory's gaze lifted toward the window, where the morning brightened into something like day. "If this is his coin on the hands of our watch, Lord Hand, we should move the moment the king is awake." "We will move when the truth will hold our weight," Eddard said. "Coin is a tool, and who the tool serves is not always clear at a glance." He studied the purse, its mockingbird neat as a signature flourish. "But it may be truth enough." A soft footfall touched the stone behind them, a whisper of silk. Eddard did not turn until the scent of spice soap and new parchment had reached him. "Lord Stark," Varys murmured, peering at the purse with as blank an expression as a man could contrive and still appear human. "You begin your day with birds, I see. A noble pastime. I have always preferred spiders." Jory's hand twitched toward his dagger. The eunuch's smile was a winter sun, light without heat. "What do you know of this?" Eddard asked, no courtesy to soften the question. Varys inclined his head. "Only that men who pay the watch in back rooms with purses worked in costly thread are more intent on secrecy than parsimony, and that such secrecy never serves the king for long. The Master of Coin would say he is ensuring the loyalty of men who keep the king's peace," Eddard replied. "Of course," Varys said softly, "and perhaps he is. One may clap from opposite sides of the stage, and yet the noise is the same." Eddard felt the careful shift of ground beneath them. The way the eunuch's words laid paths and filled pits and hid both behind polite laughter. He had no love for Varus, but he respected a tool that did not pretend to be a sword. "I will require that loyalty today," Eddard said. "Tell me, who among the gold cloaks is least likely to be bought with a purse such as this?" "None are as pure as snow," Varus confessed. "But there is a captain who keeps his boots polished as if they were his soul, Jacelyn Bywater, a trifle humorless, which in a watchman can pass for virtue." "Find him," Eddard said to Jory. "Bring him where I say when I say it." "And where is that?" Jory asked. Eddard moved the ledger aside and pulled a fresh sheet toward him. He dipped his quill with a steady hand and wrote in a firm script, tracing each word as if it bound him as surely as it would bind the realm. "The council chamber," he said. "At noon, I will have the king in his chair." "Robert will forgive the hour," Varus murmured. "He loves a spectacle, and if there is to be a bird on the spit, he will wish to carve the first slice." Eddard set down the quill and met the eunuch's eyes. "This will not be a spectacle. Every truth is a spectacle for those who have made a living in the dark," Varus said, and slipped away as soundlessly as he had arrived. The day sharpened like a blade turned on a stone. Eddard's words moved through the red keep with the force of a river. Jory went down to the barracks to fetch Bywater from his drill. Will drifted out of the tower quietly, a stick under his arm and his face set into the emptiness of any man who shuffles through a city unnoticed. The king was fetched from his bed with a horn of hot wine and coarse oaths for what was called a meeting. Renly came laughing, smelling of rose oil and steel. Pycelle hobbled in behind a train of draughts and sighs. The chairs were set around the long table. The walls held tapestries of hunts and coronations. They had seen years enough that the blues were gone to the sea and the greens to old moss. Eddard stood by the chair that should have been the king's. He felt the north in his bones. Cold rivers, tall pines, the sound snow makes when it falls from a laden bough. He had brought none of that with him, only a manner of standing and a reluctance to suffer liars. Robert came last, broad and bearded and sour with drink and sleep. The antlered stags on his doublet were rendered in gold thread, already frayed at the edges from too many mornings like this. He flung himself down with a grunt. What in all the hells could not wait for a decent meal? "The realm," Eddard said. "And a bird." Robert squinted. "A bird," he repeated, dubious and inching toward humor. "The hand shakes me from my bed to speak of birds." "Sometimes a bird is a key to a cage," Eddard replied. "Sometimes it is only a feather on the wind. Today I would know which." Renly stretched his long legs beneath the table. "If we are to eat feathers, brother, I would have them sauced." Baelish was already there, half sitting in comfort, neat as a pin, fingers folded so that the smallest movement suggested calculation rather than fidget. His little beard was trimmed to an elegant point, his dark eyes merry with something too quick to be joy. "My lord Hand, should we send for a falconer?" he asked, voice smooth as oiled wood. "There are better sports than ledger casting." "From the master of coin," Eddard said. "I require coin and truth. A purse such as this," he lifted the mockingbird pouch and laid it in the light, "contains the first in plenty. As to the second, we shall see." Pycelle leaned forward until his chain rasped against the table. He peered into the purse as if searching for a plant in the shadow of a hedge. "HM, most curious. A personal seal for disbursement is not in itself irregular. Unusual though," Renly observed idly, plucking a coin and flipping it, the gold a quick blink in the air before it hit his palm. "And such a pretty bird. Whose, I wonder?" Varus blinked once, slowly. "I believe it is the master's badge," he said in a tone of mild recollection. "Indeed," Peter agreed cheerfully. "A trifle. One must mark one's property, unless one desires the unwashed rabble to take it for theirs." "Would that extend to the city watch?" Eddard asked. "Is the watch your property now?" "The watch belongs to the city," Peter said, unruffled. "And the city belongs to the king." He smiled sweetly at Robert. "Insofar as anything belongs to anyone, which in my experience is a very small extent. Less words, Robert growled. More meat. Eddard set the purse aside. A gold cloak carried this last night and used it to buy a riverman who serves as runner to Janos Slint. Will. The door opened at Jory's signal and two of Ned's men ushered in a man with river mud still on his boots, broad-faced and sullen. The stubborn dignity of the poor caught out in the act wrapped around him like a patched cloak. He shifted from foot to foot but kept his chin high. State your name, Eddard said. Ben of the Hook, the man said in a hoarse voice. You received coin from a member of the watch, Eddard said. Aye, for a walk up the hill. To whose door? The riverman glanced at the purse, then at the rings on Peter Baelish's fingers. He swallowed. The commander's, he said. Lord Slint. And what was the message or the manner of it? No message, Ben said. Just a carry, coin for the road, and a seal to show as leave if I were stopped. He hesitated. That bird. Peter Baelish raised his brows as if mildly surprised at being included. And if a poor man brings coin to the commander of the watch on a winter's night, we assume what? That he carries treason in his purse? Perhaps he was witness to a street murder and received a reward for his civic virtue. Perhaps, Eddard acknowledged. Or perhaps the master of coin believes the watch should be paid twice. Once out of the king's coffers, once out of his own. To what end? Peter asked, a picture of innocent puzzlement. Greater loyalty, as the hand suggested. If our streets are safe, do we not all sleep more soundly? The king above all. The king sleeps soundly with honesty ringing in his ears, Eddard said. And I will have it ring now. Send for Janos Slint. There was a shuffle, a murmured order, and a pause in which the king downed a long pull of his hot wine and Renly ran a finger along the coin's edge as though testing whether it might cut. Then Slint came, a heavy man with a heavy jaw, hair gone to iron gray at the temples, his cloak of black and gold thrown back to show envy of the great men at the table as bright and shameless as the brass of his helm. You sent for me, Lord Hand, he said, not bothering to bow to Robert until the king's scowl reminded him whose hall he stood in. He gave Robert a nod like a piece of stale bread. Janos, Robert said with a pointed look that landed somewhere between warning and threat. You work at my pleasure. The pleasure is mine, your grace, Slint said unconvincingly. You were paid last night, Eddard said, by your own man's errand, in coin that bears no seal but the master of coins. Tell us, what loyalty did you sell for it? Slint's mouth thinned. I know nothing of. Ben, Eddard said gently. The riverman dug a sliver of parchment from the lining of his ragged doublet and held it forward with reluctant fingers. The piece bore an imprint so fine it was almost dainty. The mockingbird in wax, pressed over a curl of script that did not reveal a name but merely a title, expedient, like something breathed rather than written. I keep receipts, Ben muttered, and Eddard liked him a little for that. Peter let his smile widen a hair. A king's court is the worst place to be clever, he said lightly, and a few minor courtiers gathered along the walls smirked, relieved to see sport. Eddard ignored him. Janos Slint, he said again, softer now, which with him was always harder. Who are you loyal to? Slint's eyes slid toward Peter as if pushed by an invisible thumb. To the king, he said, and to the one the king sets to pay my men what they are owed. Are they not paid already? Renly asked, lazy as cats in sun. Not to keep their wives in bread when the price of barley climbs, Slint retorted, taking bait with hot foolishness. Not when the streets run thick with sells words after every bloody tourney and half a dozen new brothels open on the street of Silk in a month without a penny to the city for the trash they make. A fascinating grasp of the city's accounts, Peter said mildly. I would have expected the commander of the watch to be content with the heft of his men's purses and the tightness of their belts. Enough, Robert barked. I have no patience for the grumbling of men who take coin and argue over whose portrait is stamped upon it. Janos, if I find you have taken bribes for your fealty, I'll see you thrown so deep into the black cells that the rats above will starve. Slint's face went a mottled red. There were no bribes, he said quickly. There There were gratuities for special service on the master's instruction. That's enough of a confession for my northern ear, Eddard said. The watch is the crown's, not a catspaw for any lord to buy and hold. Peter did not color. His gaze had narrowed, quick and bright. So solemn, he murmured. I have thrown coin against the cracks in this city for years, and you call it corruption. I call it mortar. Mortar holds stones, Eddard said. But the stones must belong to the same wall. Robert shifted, interest roused at last. And what wall would you build then, Stark? One that does not lean on the Lannisters, Eddard said before he told himself to be silent. The words were out, and with them came the heat behind his eyes and the slow bruise of memory. A letter in Caitlyn's careful hand, a boy on a bed with eyes like the pale sky over the wolfswood, a catspaw's dagger with a hilt like dragonbone and a blade that knew no rust. Peter's smile trembled at the edges, and Eddard saw in that tremor both surprise and fury. Ah, the Lannisters, he said, drawing the name like silk over a blade. I wondered how long it would be before our hand waded knee-deep into family matters. Shall we parade the whole of that grim tapestry here? Mothers, sisters, lovers, and their little boys. Step careful, Robert snarled, quick as a warhammer. You forget to whom you speak, Littlefinger. Only to the state of our state, your grace. Peter inclined his head. And to the peculiar eagerness with which our good hand has sought out whimbrels and whispers instead of doing as his office demands. Paying debts, foreseeing slumps, coaxing coin from tight fists. But how satisfying to seize a purse and call it a sin. How provincial, how charming. Varus' eyelids fluttered like moths around a candle. The master's interests multiply as quickly as his wit, he murmured. Some of them useful, some of them, how shall I put it, decorative. Be silent, all of you, Robert said, and when the king raised his voice he could fill the chamber to its corners. Ned, you have brought me a purse and a seal and a confession sour as old milk. What would you have me do with it? Do what is just, Eddard said. And what is just? Robert demanded, testiness masking the hesitation of a man who had ridden over more men than he had ruled. Hang the master of coin and name a farmer to his place? How then do we pay for my boar hunt? For the ships? For the bloody royal wedding you talked me into? I need coin and the man gives it. He gives too much and too little and the figures dance. But by the gods he makes them dance. And that is more than any of these old men ever did for me. Eddard thought of a boy's breath going out like a candle. He thought of Caitlyn's voice reading Lisa's letter on a black road. He thought of honor, and how honor stank in this hot, new-webbed city, and how he had carried it here as one carries a shield through a maelstrom, and how everyday men like Baelish tapped at its rim to see if it would bend. What is just, Eddard said, is to know who rules the watch. What is just is to know that coin meant to guard the king's peace does not bend the king's peace to the will of any one man. What is just is to remove the man whose hand places that coin if he confesses to conducting a private loyalty of iron and gold under the crown's nose. Peter's smile was gone now. He sat very still, every part of him refusing to move until he had found a place where motion would profit him. If you believe I have bought the watch to your harm, you should arrest me, he said almost pleasantly. You should do it now, under the king's eye, so all may see that the North remembers justice better than the South. It is not the North that remembers, Eddard said softly. He turned to Robert. For a heartbeat, the king looked at him as he had at the trident, reckless and desperate. A man who had cut a prince from his saddle and saw in that act both victory and something fragile he had trampled. Then Robert swore, vilely and with conviction. Ser Barristan, he called. You remember what honor looks like better than any of these lickspittles. If the hand commands it, you will put the master of coin under guard until we have sorted this muck. Ser Barristan Selmy had stood against the rear wall since the start, straight as a lance planted in good earth, white cloak falling in a clean line to the floor. He moved without haste now, the weight of years and deeds balanced in his measured step. As the king commands, he said, and looked to Eddard. Peter Baelish, Eddard said. By the king's command and with the hand's consent, You will stand from the council table and give your person into the custody of Ser Barristan Selmy on suspicion of corrupting the city watch and suborning the crown's peace. Every breath in the chamber seemed to stop together. Pycelle made a small, startled wheeze. Renly's lips parted in genuine surprise. Varys' head tipped a degree, like a curious bird. Slynt froze, as if stillness could make him invisible. Peter gave a little laugh, half choke, half mirth. I have been arrested before, he mused, though rarely by men who meant it. Shall I weep? Shall I clutch at your sleeve and swear my innocence in a flood of words? Stand, Eddard said. Peter stood. He did it gracefully, as he did everything. He smoothed the lap of his doublet and held his hands out, empty, as if they were too slight to hold anything like guilt. Barristan stepped to his side and placed a respectful hand upon his arm. And there was no struggle, because Peter Baelish would never struggle in a room where struggle could not be counted and weighed. He looked at Eddard, and in his eyes there was something Eddard had not seen before. Not fear, not even anger, but attention sharpened to a knife. I suppose you will need a new man to juggle figures while you hunt wolves, he said lightly. Do try not to lose the balls. The king snorted. Take him, Robert ordered, and Barristan led Peter Baelish out with neither haste nor pageant. A quiet unmaking. A chair left. Empty. A place at the table that could not be filled with a laugh. When the door had closed, Robert sagged back and rubbed at his face. By all the gods, he said. I hate mornings. Renly blew out a breath and sat up. Well, that will set the river gossiping. What next, brother? Shall we hang Slynt now to be certain the point is made? Slynt shifted, sweat beading at his hairline. Eddard felt a distaste touch him like the memory of a rotten apple's bite. No, he said. Not yet. The watch must be held by a steady hand. Janos Slynt, you are removed from command pending inquiry. Captain Jacelyn Bywater will assume your duties until the king confirms or alters the appointment. The watch answers to me, Robert began. The watch answers to the crown, Eddard said calmly. And until this is settled, at least, it must answer to a man we can trust. He turned toward the door. Captain Bywater. Jacelyn Bywater entered in a plain breastplate that had seen oil and scrubbing more often than polish. He had the kind of face the city does not remember, unassuming, square, blank as a wall, and the manner of a man who had long ago given up on distinguishing between being liked and being obeyed. He knelt awkwardly before the king. Rise, Robert said, peering at him with interest. This one doesn't stink of perfume. I like him already. You will take command of the watch, Eddard told the captain, until the king says otherwise. Your first duty is to ensure that all orders to the watch come with the king's seal or mine, and that any coin offered to your men from private purses is reported before it is touched. Bywater's mouth tightened in something like approval. As you command, Lord Hand. He looked over at Slynt. Commander, shall we go down together to make our arrangements? Slynt bristled, but the eyes upon him weighed a man who enjoyed coin too much to tug on a lion's whiskers without cause. He bowed stiffly, a man who would count insults later and add them to an old book. He and Bywater departed with the solid sound of boots on stone. Renly stood and cocked an eyebrow at Varys. Well, Spider, you seem curiously unmoved. Varys' smile was faint. Change is the nature of the city, he said. One merely hopes it does not crumble when touched. His look slid toward Eddard. You have done a bold thing, Lord Stark. Do not thank me for it, Eddard said. You may find reason to hate it before nightfall. He dismissed the council then, for there was more to be done than words could carry. Pycelle tottered away, muttering about consultations and records. Renly clapped Eddard's shoulder with a cheer he did not feel, offering some thin jest about birds in cages. Varys lingered a breath longer than courtesy demanded. When their eyes met, he said only, "Take care," then he was gone. Robert did not move. He stared at the crushed indent where Baelish had sat, as if departure left a mark the eye could measure. He was useful, he said grudgingly, and part of me loved how he made them dance, the coin, but I liked him no more than you do. I do not make arrests because I like or dislike a man, your grace, Eddard said. Robert grunted. No, you never did. Gods keep you for that, Ned. Perhaps they brought you south just to save me from my friends. Then let them grant me the strength to do it, Eddard said, and in the saying, he understood that he had set his feet upon a path that would not fork for a long while. In the afternoon, he went down into the streets with Jory and 2 men in the grey breeches of the Hand's Guard. It was not wise for the King's Hand to walk through King's Landing with only a handful of swords, Jory told him, and Eddard did not argue. He only said that if he was to ask the city to be honest about itself, he must be honest with it. The air down among the shops and doorways hung heavy with the copper reek of blood and the sweet ache of bread just drawn from ovens. Women leaned from small windows like flowers seeking the sun, calling to their children in a dozen tongues. A man with scars like melted wax across his face played a pipe with quick, sorrowful fingers. They found Tobo Mott sweating in his forge, a great man with hair like silver wire and eyes the color of pipe smoke. He wiped his hands when they arrived and bowed with stiff courtesy and fear, for the Hand did not come calling on smiths without purpose. I'm told you have a boy, Eddard said without preamble. I have many, Mott said cautious. Some can be called men on a good day. A boy with black hair and blue eyes, Eddard said. A boy who is too big for his years and does not know what to do with his hands when no one is telling them what to hold. Tobo Mott blinked once. Slow. That one, he said. Bring him. The boy came from the back when called, wiping charcoal from his cheek with the back of his wrist, which only smudged it further. He stood in the doorway with his shoulders hunched as if to make himself smaller, though he was already large. His hair was a tangle of black, his eyes unguarded and bright the way a stream is bright where light touches it. He looked from Jory's sword to Eddard's face and then back again, and in him Eddard saw Robert Baratheon's youth like a coin turned over in sunlight and found flawless. What's your name? Eddard asked. Gendry, the boy said. He stood as any apprentice would stand to a lord, defiant, awkward, unwilling to beg for favor because he had never seen the coin used that way. Eddard's breath caught, as though the city's damp heat had suddenly thickened. He glanced at Mott. The smith's eyes darted, calculating how much of his purse he could keep from being emptied by this visit. You were paid to take him, Eddard said. I am paid for all the boys I take, Mott replied with the weary dignity of men who have had this argument their entire lives. And I am paid to train them until I am paid for the pieces they make. Not like this one, Eddard said, and Mott looked away. An armorer should always be discreet, the smith said after a moment. A boy is a boy. The kings and the Kingslayer have both stood before my work, and that is all I say of it. Eddard snorted. This city would drown in secrets if its walls shook them loose. Gendry, he turned back to the boy. Do you know who your father is? The boy looked at him, unafraid. The man paid to put me here, he said. That's as much as I know. Eddard looked at his face, his ear, the line of his jaw, the hands too big for his wrists. He saw a hammer, of course he did, and remembered a different hammer falling at the trident and the way the water had turned to wine for a heartbeat before it turned to mud again. Jory, Eddard said, you will bring the boy to the Red Keep tomorrow morning. He is to stand before the king. Jory blinked. You think? I think the king has debts to reckon, Eddard said, and the weight of those words was a yoke he had put upon himself. He would carry it until the field was plowed or he broke under it. That night, Cersei Lannister sat in her solar with the shutters thrown wide to the evening and the smell of her own perfume heavy in the air. She liked things that cut the air around them. Perfumes, glances, words. Lancel poured her wine and did not look in her eyes, which pleased her. He was beautiful in a thin way, the way deer are beautiful before the stag breaks them. They have arrested Baelish, she said to Jaime, who had not troubled to sit. He preferred to stand where light struck his hair and armor, as if he had been made for the business of gleam. The king himself set Selmy to it. Our northern lord shows claws, it seems. Jaime smiled his handsome, tired smile. He would have done better to keep them hidden, Those who show claws invite hunters. I am the hunter, Cersei said calmly, but I have lost a hound. Baelish was no hound, Jaime said. A fox, perhaps. They bite the hand only when cornered. Then we must be sure to corner him first, Cersei murmured and swirled her wine. She thought of Joffrey, clever, beautiful, angry, and of the soft, foolish face of Sansa Stark and the scandalmongers who had already begun to whisper that the Hand's daughter had trapped the prince. She thought of the spider whispering in the undercrofts and of how sound carries in stone. Robert goes hunting, she said. He always goes hunting after a quarrel. He takes the wrong wine when he is sulking. He drinks it little and often and does not know how it was poured. Jaime's mouth tightened. You are bold. I am careful, she said, and put her palm against his cheek. And tired of men who imagine they are the only ones who can plan. He kissed her fingers one by one as if counting them. What would you have me do? Nothing, she said. That will be the sweetest surprise I give them. In the dawn, when feathers of fog curled above the river, Eddard stood in the yard with Arya. The Braavosi danced around them with bare feet and a bone sword held so lightly it seemed to float. Syrio Farrell laughed when Arya's blade bit air and hissed approval when her feet remembered the steps of his strange song. Eddard watched his daughter's face change as it lately had when she moved, a new thing being born there with a stubbornness he recognized too well. Your water dances, he told Syrio when Arya paused to drink. All swords are water, Syrio said with the certainty of a man whose home is far away and must therefore be everywhere. This one, he indicated Arya with a tilt of his head, has a blade in her heart already. And what will she cut with it? Ned asked. Everything that does not let her be herself, Syrio said, and smiled his disquieting cat's smile. Do not worry, Lord. She will bleed only those who deserve it. Eddard thought of those he might bleed before all this was done, and of those he might fail to. He put a hand briefly on Arya's dark head when she passed him, and she made a face at the affection but did not duck away entirely. He loved them both so fiercely it frightened him. He went inside to meet the king. Robert received Gendry as one receives a mirror. The boy stood sullen and silent, and the king took him in with eyes that had seen too much and remembered too little. For a long breath, no one spoke. The light from the window licked across Robert's face, showing him the man he might have been if the wine had been weaker and the crown had been lighter. Who is your mother? Robert asked at last, and Gendry shrugged. She was big, the boy said. Brown hair. She sang when she scrubbed the floors and slapped me when I ran. She died. Robert flinched the slightest bit. I remember a girl like that, he said roughly. Many girls like that. He looked at Gendry, and in his gaze was a father's pity and a king's fatigue. Can you hold a hammer? Yes. Then the realm has somewhere for you, Robert said. He looked at Eddard after a moment, helpless and tired of being helpless. By the gods, Sake, Ned, must we bleed this now? The boy is what he is, a bastard, my bastard if you like. Are there not enough of them to fill both hands? It is not the boy, Eddard said softly. It is the truth he carries in his face, and what that truth says of others. He kept his voice low so the room would hold the words without them spilling into the hall. A black-haired father has fair-haired children with a fair-haired woman. Malian's lineages make a game of such things, but it is a game that does not end with laughter. Robert closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something in them was sober. Ned, he said in his old voice, the one that had called him brother on muddy roads and at snowblind campfires. Do not. If I do not, others will, Eddard said. Only they will do it with drums and torches and heads on spikes. You asked me here to tell you truth. This is the only truth I have worth the telling. The king's shoulders sagged. He looked at Gendry and flapped a heavy hand. Go, he said, back to your hammer. Let the city make you a man before it breaks you. I may have need of smiths someday who can hold a blade without trembling. Gendry blinked, surprised to be released, and went with Jory as if drawn by a wire to the door he knew best. When it was only the two of them, The king stared at the flagstones. "You will make this official, won't you?" he said. "Not today, not tomorrow. But the day after, or the day after that, you will stand in my hall and tell them that the queen's children are not mine, and that I have been made a fool of more expertly than by any sword since I took an arrow in the arse from a boy with no beard." "If you command it," Eddard said. Robert snorted without humor. "I command nothing in this. I am a great bore too drunk to realize he has already been speared. But you will do it, because you are you, and then there will be fire. I will help you through it." "Help me through it?" Robert thundered, then sagged again almost instantly. "Gods, I am tired. Write what needs writing. If my hand shakes too much, write for me. Make it say something clever. No cleverness. Make it say what must be said when a king dies and another must take his place. Not names. Words that keep swords in scabbards for a few days until the realm remembers that the harvest will not reap itself." Eddard nodded slowly. "I will have it ready." Robert went hunting the next morning, fat and belligerent with his own mortality, and returned day after with his belly ripped and his blood seeping through the bandages like wine through linen. Lancel rode in pale and shaking. Cersei's face when they lifted Robert from the litter was a masterpiece of horror and concern and satisfaction so finely layered that Eddard almost admired it as art. He took no art in the king's breath, which came in wet little flutters. In the solar where Robert loved to drink, they laid him on a bed that had never held him at this hour of day, and the king clutched at Eddard's wrist like a drowning man. "We will write now," Eddard said, and Robert nodded and cursed and nodded again. The words went onto the parchment with a steadiness Eddard did not feel, and at the end of them he wrote a single phrase where Robert's tongue would not go: "Rightful heir." Robert grunted and affixed his seal. When the wax dried, Eddard folded the sheet like a blade into a sheath and slipped it into his sleeve. It lay there, a cool weight more dangerous than any knife. Robert died with the taste of poppy on his tongue and the scent of crushed thyme in the sheets. For a while, the whole of the red keep held its breath, and then it breathed out in 50 different directions at once. Pycelle shuffled toward a bell and made a meal of tolling it. Varys went to whisper to those who had waited all their lives to be whispered to. Renly came, looked at the bed, looked at the window, and then looked at his own hands as if counting the fingers to see if they were enough for what he meant to grasp. Cersei sent for her children. Eddard sent for Barristan Selmy and Jacelyn Bywater. The throne room was full, as it always was on days when men hoped to be seen by whoever would stand at the foot of the iron steps and be called king. The swords that made the throne drank the afternoon sun with iron thirst. The room smelled of oil and fear. Sansa stood near the foot of the steps with hair like copper fire and a face that tried to be the face of a queen and succeeded only in being a girl's face wearing a crown of worry. Arya had been made to stand far away, shoved behind women who whispered of grown-up things as if the words were roses rather than thorns. Jory stood behind Eddard's right shoulder, a presence like a wall. Cersei came with Joffrey at her side and Tommen and Myrcella trailing like carefully arranged jewels. The queen's gown was a river of green silk that took light and made it royal. Jaime walked at her left, white cloak a slash of snow in summer, face set in an expression that always made Eddard think of a swordsman who had decided he would never again put his blade aside unless his hand were forced. Pycelle made a long, sonorous recitation to mark the passing of the king. He enjoyed words the way gluttons enjoy gravy. Renly watched the hall with feverish calculation. Varys smiled at no one. When the old man had done, Cersei took a step forward, regal and hard as a statue brought to life. "The king is dead," she said, and the hall stirred. She laid her hand on Joffrey's shoulder. "Long live the king." Joff's chin lifted with eagerness to be anger. He was beautiful the way a bright blade is beautiful, lovely and untrustworthy. He looked down the hall and saw only supplicants. "Lord Stark," he called, savoring the lie in the title. "Kneel and swear to me." Eddard drew the parchment, and the crackle of its unrolling cut through whispers and hearts like the clearing of a sword from its scabbard. "The late king left words," he said. "Words that direct the realm at this hour." Cersei's gaze tried to burn the parchment from his hands through force of will alone. "Robert loved his son," she said. "Do not make a mockery of his death." "Robert loved the realm," Eddard said flatly. "And he loved truth when it was spoken by friends brave enough to hurt him with it." He read the letter, quality of voice as steady as when he had recited oaths under a gray northern sky with the gods wood watching him. He spoke the words about the protector, about the rightful heir, about the keeping of swords in scabbards. He did not say Stannis' name. He did not need to. He could feel it gather in the hall like a storm. Joffrey flushed scarlet. "Tear that up," he commanded. "If the man was not already dead, I would kill him for that. That would be his first death," Renly murmured under his breath, then went still as the queen's eyes flicked to him, measuring, weighing. Cersei took one step up the iron steps, a dangerous sort of humility. "This blasphemy will not stand," she said. "You have schemed with my brother Stannis." "Your brother Stannis?" Eddard corrected, the words as soft as he could make them and no softer. "Robert's brother Stannis." "And with enemies of this house," Cersei continued as if the correction had been a bird startled off a ledge by a thrown stone. "To seize power for the dreary little lord who never laughs. We will not be ruled by a face carved from a salt block." She lifted her chin. "Janos Slynt." The name echoed dully. The man himself did not appear. Eddard inclined his head. "Commander Bywater." Jacelyn Bywater stepped sleekly from the edge of the hall with 50 men at his back. They were not all of the watch. Some wore the gray of the Hand's men, some the drab of castle guards, but they moved like a single thought. They spread along the floor under the throne and along the walls where tapestries hung. When the queen's household guard eyed them, Bywater's men did not look away. Cersei's lips tightened. She glanced at Jaime. "Protect your king," she said. Jaime's hand settled on the pommel of his sword as gently as if it had been the curve of a lover's hip. He looked at Eddard, and some old mischief crept into his gaze despite the steel it held. "We have danced around each other for weeks, Stark," he said. "Shall we stop dancing?" Barristan Selmy stepped forward and set a white-gloved hand between steel and air. He did not draw. He did not need to. His presence alone was a memory of old battles, old oaths observed when the world was still learning what oaths were worth. "Do not make war in the throne room," he said. "Not with this many children present." "Children are how wars begin," Jaime said, and the laugh he let out was not a kind sound. "Ser Barristan," Eddard said. "By the late king's words I act as protector until the rightful heir may be seated. I ask that the queen and her children be placed under gentle ward in their chambers until Lord Stannis arrives and the matter of succession may be settled according to law." The hall muttered. "Law is a stone people like best when it can be thrown at others." "You would lock the queen away? You would put your hands on me?" Cersei asked, voice silk over wire. "Your Winterfell is far, Lord Stark. Do not think your snow can snuff out a lion's breath." Eddard did not flinch. "I ask you to lay aside the crown you have set upon your son's head and not force us to strike it from him." He looked at Joffrey, and in spite of himself he saw the boy, not the blade. "Boy," he said quietly, so only those nearest would hear. "Be wise, just this once. I will send for Lord Stannis, and when he comes, if law is on your side, I will kneel to you. If not, you will be spared shame if you do not reach for what is not yours." Joffrey stood very still. For a tremulous instant, the face beneath the gold looked very young. Then his mouth twisted. "I will have your head," he whispered so fiercely his voice broke. "Enough," Barristan said, "wait in the word." He looked at his fellows in white, their faces earnest, proud, empty. "Ser Meryn, Ser Boros. We serve the crown, not a particular head that wears it. The late king has named a protector. We will do as law commands until law has said otherwise." Meryn Trant's eyes were small mean stones in a loose pouch of a face. He looked at Cersei. He looked at the gold cloaks, and what he saw there steadied his cowardice into insolence. "The prince is king," he said. He touched the hilt of his sword with a possessive little kneading. "Ser Meryn," Syrio Farrell would have said, had he been allowed into the hall. You are too slow to strike a fly. Jamie's blade rasped a hair from its scabbard. Then Barristan's gloved fist was around his wrist with surprising force. For a heartbeat, Lannister and Kingsguard looked into each other's faces and saw there the reflection of the men they had been sworn to be when they were boys. "Do not," Barristan said. "Not for her." He let the wrist go. The slight tremor in his arm told Eddard how much that hold had cost him. Bywater moved then, purely professional. His men stepped to either side of the Queen as if drawn on lines only he saw. No hands touched Cersei. No blades pointed at her children. It was choreography, badly lit and wonderfully precise. "Lord Hand," Bywater said, "awaiting your command." Eddard gave it with as little heat as he could. "Conduct the Queen and the children to their chambers and lock the doors. Set watches 10 men deep at each door and change them each hour. No one to enter without my seal or Ser Barristan's." Cersei's eyes were terrifying in their stillness. "You will regret this," she said to him as the hall watched, hungry for a scene. "You do not know what you are." "I am a father," Eddard said simply, and her mouth tightened. She put a hand on Myrcella's shoulder, more roughly than comfort would dictate, and nodded to Bywater as if allowing him a favor. The little procession moved with a false dignity, a parody of triumph in reverse. As they went, Sansa's face crumpled, then smoothed again, discipline taut at her mother's knee asserting itself like a prayer. Arya stood on her toes to see and was pushed down by a woman with a ring of keys at her waist. Jory's hand rested above the pommel of his sword, and he watched the Lannister guards with a hunter's attention. When the Queen had gone and her men with her, the hall looked at Eddard Stark. They did not love him. They did not hate him. They did not know what to do with him, and so they waited to be told. "We will send ravens to Dragonstone," he said to no one and everyone, his voice traveling across the stone as if pulled by a wind he had not summoned. "We will summon Lord Stannis Baratheon to the city to stand before the realm. Until he arrives, we will keep the peace. Captain Bywater." Bywater turned his impassive face toward him. "Place men at each of the city gates with the crown's seal. No one enters with a train of Lannister men-at-arms. If Lord Tywin sends a host, you will close the gates and light the beacons."
"Ser Barristan."
"My lord," Barristan said. "Keep the Kingsguard as they are sworn," Eddard said. "Guard the children. Guard the Queen. Guard the throne. Hold your men to their oaths until we have a king we may name without shame." "As you say," Barristan murmured, and there was a sadness in his voice that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with memory. Renly came to Eddard when the hall had mostly emptied, his step light and urgent. "You have done a thing that will shake the city to its foundations," he said, admiration and warning braided together. "You will not sleep for a month." "I sleep little now," Eddard said, weary humor flickering and dying almost before it was named. "Stannis will not forgive me for what I have thought," Renly said softly, "and I will not forgive him for what he has been. But when he comes, he will claim what you have preserved. He will be a hard king." "Better a hard king than a false one," Eddard said. Renly's mouth twisted, amused and bitter. Words spoken by men who are not required to share their table with him. "Be wary, Stark. The hardest stone cracks under the greatest frost." Varys found Eddard alone after sunset, the city below the windows glittering with enough lamps to look, from that height, almost like a constellation turned on its head. "You have done it," the eunuch said. "I confess I did not think you would. So many men look into the pit and then pretend it is a well." Eddard sat, because he had not allowed himself the grace of sitting all day. "I do not care if you approve, Lord Varys." "I do not approve," Varys said almost cheerfully. "Approval is for men who wish to be carried into the future on the backs of other men. I prefer to walk. I will say only this: you have pulled one thread in a tapestry whose design was not of your weaving, and the weaver is patient. Then let him break his nails trying to mend it," Eddard said. Varys' gaze drifted to the shuttered doors behind which the Queen and her children now slept badly. "Lions do not like cages," he observed. We did not put them in cages, Eddard said. We put them in rooms. Words are cages, too, Varys murmured. He turned to go, then paused with his hand upon the latch. There will be a night soon when you wish you had one more man in the corridor than you do. It will be a small thing that saves you or undoes you. I cannot say which it will be. I can only say, listen for it. When he was gone, Eddard let his shoulders slump and allowed himself to feel tired. He thought of Winterfell, the smell of snow and horse, the sound of the glass gardens, the rasp of his whetstone on ice. He would not see it soon, perhaps never, the faint voice that loved him least whispered. He watched the city until it blurred. In the morning, letters flew like startled starlings. Raven masters cursed and flapped and made their careful marks. One went to Stannis Baratheon at Dragonstone. The king is dead. The realm needs its rightful heir. Come with all speed and all grace. One went to the Eyrie with the courtesy due to a lady who had once been a girl holding his hand at tourneys. Eddard did not trust Lysa Arryn, but he had sworn friendship into the stone of those towering cliffs, and he would not let it break without the attempt to mend it. One went north to Winterfell itself to rob. Be wise, hold fast, keep the wolves at heel. Loved beyond words, father. He hesitated over that one longest. He did not tell the boy he feared he would never again put a hand to his shoulder. He told him only how snow falls. Jacelyn Bywater's watch did not sweep the city clean. No thing human is ever so easy, but it brushed aside enough soot to see where the chimney smoked most blackly. Men who had counted on the Queen's favor began to find their favors worthless currency. Men who had counted on Baelish's purses found themselves with sudden holes at the bottoms of the ones they owned. The street of silk grew nervous, the street of steel curious, the King's Gate dull with duty. Janos Slint seethed quietly in a house that was not his, the heft of resentment a familiar weight he sharpened on each day's hunger. In a cell that had more air than some, more light than most, Peter Baelish paced. When the guard came with his small meal at noon, Peter smiled at him as if they had made a pact and said, "Do you like stories?" He told the man a story about a boy from the Fingers, poor and bold, who had climbed a cliff he had no business climbing for the sake of a girl whose hair shone like melted honey. He told it well. The guard laughed at the right places and said the right things when the tale asked for them. When the guard left, Peter sat on the straw and leaned his head against the cool stone. He closed his eyes and conjured a board upon which the pieces moved of their own accord, and he followed them with the finger of his thought until he touched the square that would matter. He did not despair. He did not much care whether he would weep or laugh when this was done. He was already building the next thing because he had never been able to stop building, and because the world never stopped providing him with men who believed the walls they lived within had always been there. Sansa Stark learned to scrub her tears before anyone saw them. She went to the sept and bent her head in precisely the way the septa had taught, but her prayers were not the prayers she had been taught. They were names arranged like beads. Father, Mother, Arya, Lady who is dead and still the best of creatures. She dreamed of a future that had been stolen and was ashamed to realize how much of her shame was for herself and not the realm. Arya Stark learned which corridors had doorways that opened onto straight drops, which alleys held dogs who bit and which held dogs who only barked. She learned that men in armor pass her by if she moves like smoke, and that men in silk see her only when she stands still and squares her shoulders. She learned to hide a needle where no one could find it, and the needle in her sleeve said its name to her when she ran her thumb along the hilt. At Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon broke the seal upon Eddard's letter with a motion that might as well have been a sword stroke. His mouth was a line that existed less to speak than to hold in what others let out. He read the words twice and then looked out at a sea as gray as his eyes. Davos, he said, and the old smuggler came without haste, because Davos Seaworth had learned long ago that haste near Stannis was like whistling in a storm, pointless except as a thing to be tolerated. "The king is dead," Stannis said, "and the man I named friend once has done as he always does, the thing that makes his life most difficult and his conscience most quiet." He held up the parchment, then let his hand drop. "We go to King's Landing. Does the wind favor us?" Davos asked. "The wind does not concern itself with favor," Stannis said. "It blows." Davos smiled his small, private smile. He said, like you. Tyrion Lannister learned of Baelish's arrest at a crossroads in where he was teaching a stable boy that people liked him better when he tipped. He laughed so long he had to drink to keep from coughing. Well played, he said aloud, and the hill tribesmen around him looked up at the words like dogs who hear the promise of meat. Well played by whom? One asked. By the gods, for once, Tyrion said, and raised his cup to toast an enemy he did not much mind. And by a man who has never learned to cheat at dice. Tywin Lannister sat at his great table at the Rock and read the same tidings. His face did not change when he reached the part that mattered. He set the parchment down precisely where his flagon would not stain it and called for a list of the levies he could muster in a month, in a fortnight, in a week. He did not curse. He did not say his daughter's name. He had never yet failed to unhorse a man foolish enough to ride steel at him with his visor raised, and he would not begin now. In the Red Keep, night fell heavy as velvet. Eddard Stark lay down on a bed that had never been his and waited for the sleep that never loved him enough to stay. He rose when the hall froze to silence and the city's thousand hums sank into a quiet so complete it rang in his ears. He moved to the window, and in the half-light he saw, as Varys had told him he would, the small thing that would save him or undo him. A shadow at the door, a breath not quite caught in time, a whisper between men who thought walls kept their secrets when it was always the floor that betrayed them. He reached for his sword and his hand found it, the weight a relief and a burden both. He did not draw, though he wanted to. He went to the door and opened it quickly, and Jory was there with his own hand held just so, and behind Jory, a man in the gray of the Hands Guard who had a knife pushed into the back of his belt in such a way that a man would swear it had grown there without his knowledge. "Tom," Eddard said quietly, "turn about." Tomard, called Fat Tom by those who loved him, turned with a look on his face that was half guilt, half astonishment at being caught wearing both at once. "Lord," he said, "how long has that been there?" Tom swallowed. "An hour," he admitted, voice small as a boy's. Jory's mouth was a hard line. "From who?" Tom shook his head. "A man who was not there when I went to the corridor and was there when I came back. You would not look twice at him if you saw him again, and maybe that is the point." "Throw it away," Eddard said. "If a knife must come to me, it will come from a hand I can see." He met Jory's eyes. "Double the watch and change it every hour. No man stands longer than I can count to 100, and no man stands where he stood last time. If a shadow knows our corridors better than we do, let it trip over its own feet." Jory nodded. "Aye." The word had the sound of a vow about it. And so the days fell one upon the other, as days do when a city waits to become something else. Stannis' sails were sighted off Duskendale. Tywin's riders were seen on the Gold Road. Renly vanished one morning with a handful of men and a promise of a marriage made down in the Reach, where wine is always poured with a generous hand and the air smells of rosemary and ambition. Cersei did not cry. Joffrey raged in a fine gilded cage and hurled cups. Tommen ate and wept. Myrcella asked for her embroidery and pretended all was well until her fingers, which had always been sure, slipped, and a pearl rolled under a coffer where no one ever looked. Sansa went to Eddard and begged him to be kind. She used the words she had learned from songs and the words she had seen in eyes and the words she had not known she knew. He listened to her until the listening hurt so much he had to look away, and then he took her hands and told her that kindness is sometimes a winter cloak that you must tighten against the cold until it bites. Arya went to Syrio and danced until her feet ached and her breath came in knives. "You are angry," Syrio said. "Good. To learn without anger is to write without ink." "When Lord Stannis comes," Arya said, "will there be swords?" "There are always swords," Syrio said, untroubled, and made her drop needle and catch it again at shoulder height without looking. She missed twice and then did it 3 times in a row with pleasure so bright it warmed her even when she failed for the 4th time. Jacelyn Bywater brought Eddard a sealed note found under a plate in the kitchens. He held it with 2 fingers as if it might bite. When he broke the seal, he found one phrase, written in a neat, unremarkable hand. "The bird still sings." He did not have to ask whose mockingbird that was. He burned the note over a candle and ground the ash between his fingers until it was part of the stone. Peter Baelish listened for the skip in a jailer's step that meant a woman had kissed him that day and heard it, and counted the coins that meant the man would let a note slide under a plate. He did not care if the note never reached any eye that could free him. He cared only that he could still send it and that Eddard Stark would know, somewhere in the tower where truth lay in stacks that could crush a man, that Peter's fingers were still delicate and patient and very, very clean. On the third morning after Robert's death, the mists lifted over the Blackwater, and sails like teeth filled the mouth of the river. Dragonstone colors snapped in a clean wind. At their head, a banner with a crowned stag upon a field of black went up, and the city watched as if a new star had pricked the sky. Stannis Baratheon came ashore and carried with him a weather that made lesser men reach for their cloaks. In the throne room, he stood before Eddard Stark and did not offer his hand. "You have made a great many enemies," he observed, "and a few friends." "The enemies came unasked," Eddard said. "The friends I will pay attention to." "You will obey the law," Stannis said. "So will I. That is why we will be hated and called stubborn and made fun of when the wine is flowing. Cannot be helped." "You are the rightful heir," Eddard said, and while the words did not make a crown appear upon Stannis' brow, they made something shift in the room that had nothing to do with banners or chairs. "We will see," Stannis said, because he would not accept a thing merely for being given without suspicion. He turned to Barristan. "Sire, your oath binds you to the king. Am I he?" "It binds me to the crown," Barristan said with a weary dignity that turned into strength when he straightened his back. "And to the realm. I will serve the rightful king." He looked at Eddard as if asking permission to speak a thing that might hurt. "I would see the children spared as much pain as can be spared them." "We will do what we can," Eddard said, and meant it. Joffrey was brought to the hall with a guard at each elbow and a fury that wanted to grind its teeth to make sparks. Cersei did not come, claiming a headache. The tale was true enough to be useful. Tommen clung to Myrcella's hand in a way that might have touched those who watched if the watching had not been done through a mesh of politics and fear. Stannis looked at the boy he would disinherit and showed him neither pity nor contempt, because both are luxuries he had never allowed himself. "I am sorry," he said, the words so stiff they might have been taken from a chest and put on without knowing how they fasten. "What is done cannot be said to be undone by apologies." Joffrey spat at him. The spittle hit Stannis' boot. He did not move. Barristan closed his eyes briefly, as if weary of all men younger than himself in this one act. The proofs were brought, as proofs are when men prefer ink to blood. Lineages laid open upon tables, hair brought in combs from poor beds, Mott muttering about no two pieces of steel being the same, Varys purring, Pycelle sighing, Renly absent and loud in his absence. The realm watched, and in the watching began to choose sides. At the end of a very long day, Eddard Stark went to the black cells and looked at Peter Baelish through iron bars. Peter stood as if he had known precisely when Eddard would come and had been waiting not so long that he'd grown bored. "Lord Stark," he said, "have you come? To cut my throat at last? Or to thank me for teaching you that the city is made of more than swords and good intentions?" Eddard said nothing for so long the silence became a thing in the room with them. At last he said, "I do not understand men who make mazes they may not live to walk through." "Then build a tower," Peter suggested, "and admire it until you realize that what you have always wanted is not height but a door." Eddard reached into his sleeve and drew out the delicately carved mockingbird from the purse he had seized. He held it up between two fingers as if it were a piece of jewelry he had been given and wanted to confirm was genuine. "You carry this when you wish a man to know who paid him but not to whom he belongs," he said. "A lesson in ambiguity. If I hang you, men will say I hated your lesson. If I free you, they will say I have learned it too well. Either way," Peter murmured, "they will speak of me." He smiled like a boy who has stolen a tart and finds the stolen sweet tastes no better than the one he could have bought. "Kill me if you must, but if you do not, and you ever wish to move a piece you cannot reach, you will come to me again." and then I will be your lesson." Eddard closed his fist around the little bird until the edges bit his skin. "I do not think I will come to you for anything," he said. "I think I will keep the city by telling it what it is and asking it to be something else." "That will do for a beginning," Peter said gently. "The end is always the difficulty." Eddard turned and left, Jory's steps a reassurance at his shoulder. When they reached the stair, Jory said, "If you had given me the sign, I would have killed him." "I know," Eddard said. "Shall I?" Eddard shook his head. "Not yet. Not that way." They climbed. Outside, the sea wind had shifted. Somewhere beyond the city, beyond the day's careful lines, great banners were being unfurled and great men were deciding to be small. Somewhere, a red woman stared into a flame and saw a face she did not yet recognize. Somewhere, a boy at the wall wrapped his cloak around himself and muttered a curse that tasted wrong in his mouth and thus meant he would keep it longer than he should. Somewhere, a girl with silver hair turned from a pyre and saw a shape she had not imagined before the light showed it to her. Within the heart of the city, Eddard Stark stood upon a balcony and looked down at streets that had begun to forget the last king while they chose what to call the next. He did not think of Winterfell now, or if he did not realize it, because the world had narrowed to the space between his breath and the next man's blade. He thought only this, repeated with each beat of his heart like a prayer: "Do not fail. Do not fail." Without knowing he spoke, he said, "We will make a garden here." "A garden?" Jory asked, half smiling, because he had learned to draw warmth from Eddard's odd sayings. "A place where something might grow," Eddard said, "even if the soil is thin, even if the stones push up." He stood there a long time, and the city moved beneath him, a living thing that fed and bled and birthed and died. And in the high rooms of the Red Keep, men and women set their teeth into secret meats and swallowed them with wine. The ravens had flown. The answers would come. And from the east and the west and the south, the storms gathered.